The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announced to the House her approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Illinois, Congressman Jackson.
Would everyone please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain requests for 15 one-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask permission to address the House for 1 minute and advise to extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, yesterday Byron York in the Washington Examiner correctly recognized the memory of Ronald Reagan on the 100th anniversary of the President's birth. Without question, President Reagan stood for policies like lower taxes, less regulation, and a strong national defense. Having served President Reagan's Energy Secretary Jim Edwards as Deputy General Counsel 81 to 82, I saw firsthand his success in reducing regulations. I witnessed the success of a strong national defense by being an International Republican Institute election observer in Bulgaria, witnessing captive nations achieve freedom and democracy, with victory in the Cold War, causing the defeat of communism across Europe and Asia. Ed Meese was quoted for his contrasting the liberating policies of Reagan as opposed to the big government agenda of the current president. The resources for conservatives are highlighted in California at the Reagan Library at Simi Valley and the Reagan Ranch Center of the Young America's Foundation at Santa Barbara. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we'll never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois rise?
Madam Speaker, to address the House for 1 minute and consent to provide consent.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, the unemployment rate last month dropped from 9.4% to 9%, but only 36,000 jobs were created. Wow! 36,000 jobs equals 0.4%. How did the rate drop so much with only 36,000 new jobs? Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, it's an illusion. If you're chronically unemployed and have given up looking for a job, you don't count as unemployed in America. You fall out of the statistics. So as more and more people are out of work for longer periods of time, they are literally left out of the system. Houdini couldn't have performed an illusion as clever as the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But shouldn't a government of, for, and by the people care about its most vulnerable in this economic climate? I want to remind the government of the urgency of our economic situation. Send me your resume and your story to resumesforamerica@mail.house.gov. I want to have your story entered into the congressional record to remind the Congress of the fierce urgency of now. Madam Speaker, stop the illusions. The American people need jobs and they want to go to work. We have too many Americans who are chronically unemployed, and we don't even count them anymore. We need to do something about it, and we need to do something about it now. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina rise?
Has permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, my colleagues, the American people are watching. More than anything else, this Congress will be judged on what it does to help move this struggling economy forward. One of our most important and effective programs to assist workers displaced by changes in the global economy has been the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Workers Act. Unfortunately, key provisions to this program are set to expire this week unless Congress takes action. Last year, displaced workers in North Carolina received over $56 million through TAA, the second largest amount given to a single state, to ensure that they had the support and training necessary to transition into an emerging sector of the economy. This program is working. We must support the economy and these workers by immediately approving a long-term extension of the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Workers program. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee rise?
I rise to address the House unless the gentleman from Indiana. Rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In 1970, our air was so polluted that breathing was literally a public health threat. Recognizing that need to give Americans clean air, Republican President Richard Nixon signed into law the Clean Air Act. In its 40-year history, the Clean Air Act has saved the United States trillions of dollars by keeping Americans out of hospitals, in schools, and in the workforce. The nonpartisan American Lung Association estimates in 2010 alone it saved over 160,000 lives. But despite saving 160,000 lives and trillions of dollars in the last 40 years, the Republican majority claims this legislation is destroying the American economy. They believe that act must be repealed so big oil and corporate polluters can no longer be held responsible for destroying our air and endangering public health. If Republican efforts to repeal the EPA's Clean Air Act authority are successful, we will return to a time when every breath you take will endanger your life. History disproves Republican claims and illustrates that the Clean Air Act saves lives, creates jobs, and saves the government tens of trillions of dollars. But apparently these facts that Richard Nixon understood do not matter. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise? For the gentleman from Indiana. Without objection.
You know, Madam Speaker, one of the things that we're going to hear from our good friends on the Democrat side of the aisle day in and day out is how the Republicans are callous because we're cutting spending. And they can come to the floor and enumerate hundreds and hundreds of programs that are so good for America that they cannot be cut, and therefore we shouldn't do anything to reduce our spending. We have a $14 trillion national debt. We're $1.5 trillion short this coming fiscal year. If we don't do something, we're going to feel it, but our kids and our grandkids are going to have a lower quality of life because we cannot sustain this kind of spending. So I'd just like to say to my colleagues, I anticipate listening to you rant and rave about how we're cutting programs, but long term, unless we get our fiscal house in order, the future of America is really at risk. And I think the people across this country understand it's time to take a scalpel to the budget. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I ask to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, yesterday afternoon, 26 Republicans joined me and 121 of my Democratic colleagues in defeating a misguided attempt to extend, without badly needed changes, 3 soon-to-expire provisions of the Patriot Act. We must remember that the powers of intelligence and enforcement are among the most important powers of government, but also the most fearsome. They must be used very, very carefully. Last year, I joined Representative Conyers and other members in offering the USA Patriot Amendments Act. This bill would have revised the 3 controversial provisions we debated yesterday and other provisions to ensure that government agents would have to demonstrate a clear connection between the target of surveillance and terrorism investigation. It is that bill we should be voting on, and I ask the House leadership to schedule hearings and a vote on that bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today to honor the life and accomplishments of General Vang. General Powell passed away on Thursday, January 6, 2011, and today marks the 6th day and final day of the Hmong spiritual practices which are traditionally conducted by the Hmong community after the passing of an individual. I stand here today to support the internment of General Vang in Arlington National Cemetery. The accomplishments and service that General Vang has given to the United States are not only numerous, but are everlasting. Not only was General Powell determined to protect his country, but he served to protect the lives of American soldiers. He fought to cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail so that supplies could not be utilized to fuel the enemy's war efforts. He provided aid and support to downed American pilots in addition to defending American outposts. The leadership of General Powell helped save thousands of U.S. service members' lives and was influential force during the Vietnam War. The dedication and service of the general not only earned him the title of Lord Protector of the country, but has also made him a hero in both Hmong community and the United States of America. I yield my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does a gentlelady from California rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We look for ways to put our economy back on track. We have to be mindful of the quality of higher education that we are providing our future generations. I agree that difficult decisions must be made in order to guarantee this country's economic prosperity, but access to higher education should not be negotiable. In California, we have seen tuition increase by as much as 10% on higher education, and Governor Brown has proposed a $1.4 billion cut to higher education funding. We argue that sensible solutions to our economic difficulties are essential to prevent this burden from being passed on to the next generation. But let's look around. Our next generation is here. It's at higher education. Students are dropping out of colleges not because their GPA is too low, but because they can't afford the higher tuition costs. Our future doctors, our engineers, our politicians, our educators, this is what we're talking about. We cannot rebuild our economy when we do so at the expense of our future generations and their American dream. Madam Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
To address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I spent this morning talking with people at the Good Jobs, Green Jobs Conference. This conference is dedicated to building jobs for Americans that are sustainable, that are green, and that will help our country meet the needs of the future. They talked about efficiency. They talked about saving money through weatherization and putting people back to work doing it. Manufacturing, windmills, solar, all these things are so vitally important, but also transit, all these critical important things to make our employment grow and to help us stay green. Unfortunately, however, Madam Speaker, we still have 14 million Americans who are unemployed, and in this time that we have spent in this new Congress, we have not spent any time talking about job creation, green or otherwise. The time is now to focus on jobs. I implore the Majority Caucus to begin the dialogue about jobs because we haven't talked about it at all. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
To address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to ask my Republican friends a simple question. Where is the job creation agenda? In the first month of the 112th, this body has not taken up a single piece of legislation that will create jobs and put Americans back to work. Let's look at what we've done. H.R. 2, repeal protections of health insurance reform, created no jobs. H.R. 359, eliminating public financing for presidential campaigns, created no jobs. H.R. 38, establishing a budget with no numbers, created no jobs. H.R. 519 on the floor today to reduce our annual payment to the United Nations and go back into arrears, again, creates no jobs. Madam Speaker, my Republican friends claim that job creation was their #1 priority. The American people said loud and clear that job creation should be their #1 priority. During the previous Congress, we made that our priority, which is why we're in the midst of 12 consecutive months of private sector job growth. I ask my Republican friends to put aside ideology and join with the Democrats in making job creation their #1 priority. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The Chair lays before the House the following communications.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to Section 803A of the Congressional Recognition for Excellence in Arts Education Act, I am pleased to appoint the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas to the Congressional Award Board. Thank you for your consideration of this appointment. Signed sincerely, Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic Leader. House of Representatives. Sir, pursuant to Section 4B of House Resolution 5, 112th Congress, I am pleased to reappoint the Honorable James P. McGovern of Massachusetts as co-chair of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Thank you for your attention to this appointment. Signed sincerely, Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic Leader. The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives. Sir, Pursuant to 2 United States Code 2081, I am pleased to reappoint the Honorable Marcy Kaptur of Ohio to the United States Capitol Preservation Commission. Thank you for your consideration of this appointment. Signed sincerely, Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic Leader.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later today. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass Senate Bill 188.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 188, an act to designate the United States Courthouse under construction at 98 West 1st Street, Yuma, Arizona, as the John M. Roll United States Courthouse.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Mr. Denham, and the gentlewoman from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend the remarks and include extraneous material on Senate Bill 188.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Senate Bill 188 would designate the federal courthouse currently under construction in Yuma, Arizona as the John M. Roll United States Courthouse. On January 8th, our nation suffered a horrendous tragedy. One of our colleagues, the gentlewoman from Arizona, Representative Gifford, was carrying out her duties meeting with her constituents in Tucson, Arizona, when a gunman shot 19 people, killing 6. Among those killed that day was Judge John Roll, who was simply stopping by on his way back from attending Mass to say hi to his Congresswoman. Judge Roll was Chief Judge of the U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona and was first appointed to the federal bench by President George H.W. Bush in 1991. His commitment to serving the public predated his appointment to federal court. For nearly 40 years, he dedicated his life to public service and the law. Before becoming a federal judge, Judge Roll was a judge on the Arizona Court of Appeals, serving as presiding judge and vice chief judge. Earlier in his career, he was an assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Arizona. He also served to the citizens of Arizona at the local level, first as a Tucson assistant attorney and later as the deputy county attorney in Pima County. It is fitting to honor Judge Roll in this way, given his reputation as a respected jurist and his service to the law. Although we're honoring the life of Judge Roll through naming a federal courthouse after him, we must also honor and remember the others who were killed and wounded that tragic day. Among those killed was one of Representative Gifford's staff members, a pastor, a secretary, a homemaker, a grandmother, and a 9-year-old little girl who had just been elected to her student council. Each of them simply going that day to meet their congressman, never thinking their lives would be in danger. And in this tragedy, we must not forget the heroes, those who took action, risking their own lives, stopping the gunman, and preventing more deaths and injuries. Our prayers continue to be with Congresswoman Gifford, the others who were wounded, and the families of all the victims. In honoring Judge Roll by passing this legislation, it is important that we do not forget that all the victims that day should be honored and remembered. I support passage of this legislation and urge my colleagues to do the same. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
S-188 is a bill to honor the life and public service of Judge John McCarthy Roll, who was gunned down along with others at a community meeting in Tucson, Arizona. Judge Roll graduated from the University of Arizona Law School in 1972, and he spent the next 40 years of his life dedicated to public service. Upon graduation from law school, Judge Roll served as a bailiff in the Pima County Superior Court and soon became deputy county attorney for Pima County, where he prosecuted criminal cases until 1980. After his service as Pima County prosecutor, Judge Roll moved to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona, where he served both as a civil attorney and criminal attorney until 1987, primarily prosecuting drug cases for the federal government. Judge Roll then served as a state court judge until he was appointed to the federal bench by President George H.W. Bush in 1991. From this perch, Judge Roll earned his reputation as a giant amongst the legal community in Arizona. Judge Roll was respected by his colleagues and the attorneys that appeared before him as someone who devoted his life to the rule of law and afforded all who appeared before him a fair opportunity to present their case. Judge Roll's 20-year service to the judiciary ended tragically on January 8, 2011, when he was shot and killed while attending a local event sponsored by the gentlewoman, our colleague from Arizona, Gabby Giffords. Judge Roll attended the event in the course of his duties to thank Congresswoman Giffords for sending a letter to the Chief Judge of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals requesting that he declare Judge Roll's federal district a judicial emergency because it was besieged with a high number of immigration and drug cases. Judge Roll also worked closely with Congresswoman Giffords to justify to federal officials the need for construction of the Yuma, Arizona U.S. courthouse to adjudicate the growing backlog of these cases. Madam Speaker, given Judge Roll's extraordinary service to his country, it is so fitting and proper that we honor his memory by designating that very same courthouse, the U.S. courthouse now under construction in Yuma, Arizona, as the John M. Roll United States Courthouse. This action today, Madam Speaker, will clear the bill for the President and hopefully provide a small comfort to Judge Roll's wife, Maureen, his 3 children, and his 5 grandchildren in honor of his service. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting S-188, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I wish to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Quayle.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from California for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of S-188. I can think of no one more worthy of this honor than Judge John Roll. Naming a federal courthouse after Judge Roll won't make the pain of his passing any easier for his family and close friends, but will help ensure that his exceptional legacy and final act of heroism will never be forgotten. While the painful memories of the Tucson tragedy will eventually begin to fade, there will always be a John M. Roll United States Courthouse in Yuma. Madam Speaker, John Roll's job was to look out for the people of Arizona. That's what a good judge is supposed to do, and John Roll was a great one. We've heard from friends and colleagues about how fair he was in the courtroom and how he worked to make sure that Arizona's judicial system, with its ever-growing caseload, was working efficiently for the people. And it was no surprise, Madam Speaker, when we learned that Judge Roll died while helping to save the life of Ronald Barber, one of Congresswoman Gifford's staff members. So even at the very end, Madam Speaker, Judge Roll was doing what he did every day before that, looking out for the people of Arizona. For your service to our great state and this country, Judge Roll, we offer our deepest thanks. We will never forget you or the other good Americans who passed away on that terrible day. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman, the leader from California, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I thank her and you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this bill to the floor, this resolution to name a federal courthouse in Yuma, Arizona for John M. Roll, be called the John M. Roll United States Courthouse. How appropriate. Chief Judge Roll was a dedicated public servant, as our colleagues have referenced, serving as a federal judge in Arizona, a state judge, and a prosecutor for the city, county, and at the federal levels. And Chief Judge Roll was a proud son of Arizona, moving there as a little boy, but lived there for the vast majority of his life, receiving his undergraduate and law degrees at the University of Arizona. Tragically, Chief Judge Roll was one of the 6 Americans who were taken from us during the horrific shooting in Tucson. He died while helping to save the life of Ron Barber, as has been mentioned, a staffer for Congressman Giffords, protecting him with his own body. He had just come from Mass. I spoke to his wife, Maureen, the other day, and she said that was his regular routine on Saturday, to go to Mass in the morning. He then went from there to see Congressman Gabby Giffords at Congress on Your Corner, and you know what happened next. He was going to talk to her about securing resources for the overwhelming court system. This was characteristic, as he dedicated his entire life to ensuring justice. He was known as a scholar of the law and a man of integrity, and he is an example of the public servants who are doing serious and significant work in the judiciary every day. We had the honor of, when we went to Tucson with the President to visit Gabby and to meet with some of the families, to also take pride in the fact that Justice Anthony Kennedy from the Supreme Court came on the trip, as well as Sandra Day O'Connor, who is from Arizona, who was there that evening as well. They were joined by other justices who served with Judge Roll as a tribute to him personally and officially. It was wonderful to hear the beautiful statements that they made in our conversations about Chief Judge Roll, and they all sang the praises of Maureen Roll. So I hope it is a comfort to Maureen, to their 3 sons and 5 grandchildren, that so many people are saddened by their loss, or are praying for them at this very sad time, and that this courthouse will long stand as a tribute, and an appropriate tribute, to Judge Roll. That, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I wish to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, if I ask for unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I stand here today in support of Senate Bill 188. Judge Roll lost his life in the tragic shooting in Tucson 1 month ago, and I believe it is a fitting tribute to honor his memory and service to our country by designating the Yuma Courthouse the John M. Roll United States Courthouse. Judge Roll loved his country. His service as a federal judge and the Chief Judge for the United States District Court was admirable. He served selflessly, as he always worked to ensure that the rule of law was upheld. Judge Roll loved Arizona, attending the University of Arizona for his undergraduate work and the University of Virginia for his law degree. He returned to the state he loved to serve Pima County, Arizona, and the United States. Judge Roll's patriotism was evident in the fact that he went out to talk with his representative at the local Congress on Your Corner event. His love for his country inspired him to serve and motivated him to come and support Gabby Giffords. Judge Roll lost his life trying to protect another. His act of courage will always be remembered, and his upstanding character will never be forgotten. My thoughts and prayers are with his family today. The United States and Arizona has lost a distinguished public servant, but he will always be remembered for his diligence and dedication to our nation. May God be with Judge Roll's family and all the victims of the shooting in Tucson. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Maryland.
At this time, Madam Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to our colleague from Arizona, another of our colleagues from Arizona, Ed Pastor.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
First of all, I want to thank my colleague from Maryland for yielding the time. About 3 years ago, Judge Roll informed us that the courthouse in Yuma, which is in southeastern Arizona, lacked the space because of the increased cases dealing with the drug cases and immigration cases that the federal court was facing in the Yuma area. And it was very interesting because at the time, the request was kind of unusual because in the line of things, at least in the court itinerary, the Yuma court was not under consideration, but Judge Roll impressed on the delegation that this was sorely needed in the Yuma area, and that requested the Arizona delegation to work in bringing forth some monies. And I have to tell you that in the last appropriation bill that passed this House, the omnibus bill, Chairman Jose Serrano from New York was able to appropriate the monies to have this courthouse constructed. And so today, and first of all, I want to thank the leadership of the Congress, of the House of Representatives, for bringing this bill. It's very appropriate that we name this courthouse in the name of Judge Roll, who was the presiding judge of the Arizona courts. As you've been told, and rightfully so, he was a jurist, a scholar, a man who had a deep belief in God, but more than that, he was a father, a good husband, and one who continually supported the efforts of his community. And so on behalf of the Arizonans, we thank this House for naming this courthouse in Yuma, Arizona, in honor of Judge Roll, and may he rest in peace.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I wish to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Flake.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank the committee for bringing this resolution forward. I rise in support of it. As Judge John Roll pored over the plans and designs for a new courthouse to be built in Yuma, I'm sure his intentions were not to cement a legacy in brick and mortar. To anyone who knew him, maintaining a reputation as a fair, ethical, and intelligent jurist was legacy enough. One Tucson attorney said, quote, "One of the finest compliments you can give him was that you got your fair day in court." In fact, when the ability of the Arizona federal court system to ensure such timely care and attention to all of its proceedings came into question from what he called a tsunami of federal cases, Judge Roll declared a judicial emergency for the District of Arizona. An Arizonan since childhood, a two-time graduate of the University of Arizona, and as a public servant within the state for nearly 40 years, Judge Roll was a tireless advocate. His mission would bring him to seek the assistance of his representative, Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. Eventually, their efforts helped to secure approval for the funding for the Yuma courthouse. And so with the construction of this building, set to begin this July, Judge Roll labored over the finishing touches. To him, the building represented a means to an end to better serving the people of Arizona. The Judge John M. Roll United States Courthouse will now represent and commemorate Judge Roll's legacy as a selfless public servant. Let me just say that I had the honor to attend his funeral along with some of my colleagues here. And to hear the stories of selfless service and care and for what an incredible, wonderful jurist he was to represent the United States government and to ensure that justice was served, and for his service to the people of Arizona. There was such an outpouring of love and support for the family, and basically just honoring the legacy of this great man. And so I'm glad we can do this small part to ensure that people remember what he has done for the state and for his country. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Maryland.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
The gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I wish to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Schweikert.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I never met Judge Rolls, but if you are judged by the comments, the love, the number of touches I've received just in the last 24 hours, we have a gentleman here with an amazing history and an amazing reputation. Just walking up the stairs, coming here onto the floor of the House, I was on the floor with a local attorney named Steve Twist, who could not stop sharing comments of the fairness, the devotion to his faith, and the fact of the matter is the reputation of he was tough, but you were always going to get your appropriate day in court. And therefore, naming this courthouse in Yuma that he painstakingly spent time on helping design and get it right, I hopefully is just a first step in a fitting tribute to a life well lived. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Maryland.
I'll continue to reserve.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, is the Minority Party ready to yield back?
Is the minority party ready to yield back the balance of the time?
Madam Speaker, we have one speaker on his way from Arizona, and so I'll continue to reserve. Madam Speaker.
The lady is recognized.
Thank you. One of the things that we don't talk about very often is that there are different ways that people choose to serve. Some choose to serve in elected office. Some choose to serve in uniform. And Judge Roll chose to serve in our judiciary. And it's one of those parts of our system that Judge Roll rightly recognized is one in which it's important to hear with fairness those who come before the court. And every indication of Judge Roll's service indicates that as those appeared before him, he operated and functioned fairly in his courtroom. It is why he was so respected. As we look at the 20-year his 20-year service ending just in January 2011. So tragically, we think perhaps several months ago one would not have thought what the name of the courthouse would be under its construction in Yuma, Arizona, and yet today, because of Judge Roll's service and the tragedy that met him, it seems so obvious that this courtroom should be named for such an important public servant. Given Judge Roll's extraordinary service to the country, it is true that in his memory we will remember him as a public servant, but we will also remember the purpose for which he served this country in our judiciary. The John M. Roll United States Courthouse will be a place not just that his family, his wife Maureen and his family will be able to recognize their memory, but it will be one that other attorneys and judges and litigants will recognize as a place of fairness, that's a fair representation of his service to this nation. And so I do join my colleagues in supporting S-188, and at this time I'd yield the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we have no further speakers. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Senate 188? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Madam Speaker, I demand the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 519.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 519, a bill to secure the return to the United States the $179 million overpaid into the United Nations Tax Equalization Fund as of December 31st, 2009, and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ms. Ross-Layton, and the gentleman from California, Mr. Berman, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you.
From Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate it, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
She wishes. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The American people have spoken. They overwhelmingly voted for today's U-Cut proposal, calling for U.S. taxpayer funds overpaid to the United Nations to be returned to the United States. The United Nations holds about $179 million overpaid by U.S. taxpayers into the UN Equalization Fund. This is not about the UN finally doing the right thing by paying for security upgrades at its headquarters in New York. The UN is not paying for anything. After years of avoiding its responsibilities, the UN, with the support of the Obama administration, is asking the American taxpayer to bail them out once again and pay 100% of the proposed construction cost. To make matters worse, allowing the UN to take $100 million of the refund owed to U.S. taxpayers would be an increase for the UN budget. This U-cut not only ensures that U.S. taxpayers receive the funds owed to the U.S. Treasury, but it prevents a $100 million increase for the UN. The UN doesn't want the American people to know this, so the UN and the State Department are now stating that they should allow this increase because it is for security upgrades. This is not about security. This is the UN and the Obama administration looking for another excuse to avoid making the difficult choices and requiring accountability from the United Nations. This is not like U.S. Embassy construction projects where the needs are assessed, where a detailed plan is developed on how the security needs will be addressed, on how the funding request is presented, and how the Congress will then allocate the funds. No. After months of requests, my colleagues on the committee and I are still waiting for the details on this proposed construction project, and more recently on how the UN would fund it. In news reports, I read that the State Department may have already handed over to the UN $100 million of our overpayment into the TEF. The Tax Equalization Fund, TEF, is a roundabout mechanism premised on the UN belief that UN employees' salaries and benefits should be tax-free. The TEF has collected much more from the U.S. than it has paid out. The UN's most recent biennial financial report states that the amount of the U.S. paid surplus has grown to $179 million. The UN readily admits that it does owe the overpaid money to our U.S. taxpayers. According to the UN's official financial report, the TEF surplus is, quote, payable to the United States of America pending instructions as to its disposition, end quote. This U-cut proposal declares that it is U.S. policy to seek the return of those funds and the reform of the TEF assessment process. And until the Secretary of State certifies to Congress that those funds have been returned, the bill withholds from our UN dues an amount exactly equal to the overpayment identified by the UN. That's the simple question, Madam Speaker, framed by today's vote. Should the $179 million taxpayer dollars, which the UN again admits it has no right to keep, be returned to the United States taxpayers? Should the American people be asked to foot the entire bill for the UN construction project? Since this issue has begun receiving public attention, there has been a great deal of misinformation that I would like to address briefly. Last week, the Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizational Affairs reportedly said that, quote, the $179 million in overpayments are in the form of credits, not cash, and thus cannot be refunded per se. Madam Speaker, this is simply not true. Not only does the statement by the IO Assistant Secretary conflict with what the State Department budget professionals have most recently told the Congressional Budget Office, but it conflicts with the UN's own position. They can't even get their story straight. The UN's most recent financial report makes clear that the $179 million surplus is a distinct account payable to the United States of America. So the question is, should the U.S. pay an additional $100 million to the UN? I first raised the TEF surplus issue in a letter to Secretary Clinton in November 18th of last year. The State Department response since that time has been tardy, incomplete, and evasive. At a November 18th briefing, the State Department mentioned for the first time that it was considering whether to allow the UN to spend part of the U.S. surplus on an unrelated construction project at the UN headquarters in New York. Nothing certain. The Foreign Affairs Committee requested detailed plans, cost estimates for the proposed construction project so that we could credibly assess the claimed $100 million price tag. I repeated that request on December 22nd, then on December 29th, then on January 4th, and on January 25th. We're still waiting for those details. Only thing that we have gotten, Madam Speaker, other than a few PowerPoint slides, the only figures we have received is this. Less than a single page of summary totals with no supporting documentation. This is it. The State Department has admitted that this construction proposal, in the words of the Undersecretary for Management, quote, is primarily the responsibility of the United Nations, end quote. But they want to stick the American taxpayers with the bill. I disagree with the State Department, and the American people, they know that we should not be penalized because the UN failed to adequately plan for its own security needs. If the administration wants to fund this project, the State Department should identify cuts to UN programs to offset the cost and then ask Congress to pay for it directly, explicitly, and clearly. Whatever the merits of this proposal, it should not be taken from a refund owed to U.S. taxpayers. My colleagues, let's join together in support of this week's U-Cut, and with that, Madam Speaker, I respectfully reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves her time. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to this legislation.
The gentleman is recognized.
I yield myself 2.5 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2.5 minutes.
This is called the U-Cut agenda. It's the second bill on the U-Cut agenda. If this is the kind of bill that's going to be on the U-Cut agenda, I would suggest that we rename it the U-Cut what agenda? The CBO says in its official cost estimate, implementing H.R. 519 would have no effect on the federal budget. No effect. Not $1 is saved by this particular proposal. So we are faced with a piece of legislation that jeopardizes critical security upgrades at the United Nations headquarters. And let me just point out here, there's a large improvement plan for the UN building that's going on now. That is not paid by the U.S. It is paid by the apportioned assessed dues of all the member countries. This is about a perimeter cost dealing with FDR Drive that our colleagues, Mr. Thompson and Mr. King, and the other New Yorkers who will speak on this will go into more detail on. That's a host country obligation. There is not $180 million in that fund because $100 million of it has been committed to the request of the New York City Police Department to securitize the perimeter of the UN building where the FDR Drive goes under the UN. Secondly, it puts us back in arrears at the UN. We've tried that once. That doesn't get our agenda through. We have a big agenda and a big reform agenda at the UN. Failing to pay our obligations is not the answer, and because of the nature of this fund and the commitments already made, I repeat what the CBO says. H.R. 519, this legislation, would have no effect on the federal budget. So we're not saving money, we're spurning the important security requests, and we are going back into a pattern of arrearages that undermines our efforts at the UN, does not help to achieve those goals. I yield back. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm so pleased to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Judge Poe.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding and supporting and sponsoring this legislation. Madam Speaker, it seems fairly simple to me. The American taxpayers have overpaid the UN. The UN didn't tell anybody about it. Heritage Foundation found out about it and published it last year, and all of a sudden the UN admits, yes, we have $180 million of American money that was overpaid. The State Department has intervened, and a letter today that I ask unanimous consent to be filed into the record by saying,
without objection,
they're saying we not only have intervened, but we've kind of told the UN to spend $100 million of that money on security in New York. Now, no question about it, New York probably needs more security around the UN. That's a different issue. This issue is basic honesty. It's an overpayment by taxpayers. The UN got caught, and they should return the money to the United States. And the United States should decide if we want to appropriate more money for security around New York City or the UN. That is a different issue. But this is an issue of honesty. First of all, the State Department didn't have the authority to go ahead and say, keep a little of that money, $100 million of it, and spend it on security. They didn't have that authority. And now there's only $80 million left. So I submit we should pass this legislation. We should expect that the UN, like everybody else, deal in basic honesty. And when we make an overpayment, if you make an overpayment in your private, personal business, whoever you sent that money to owes you that money. Somebody else can't come in and say, go ahead and spend it on security or something else because they overpaid the money. The money returns to that individual. Just like this taxpayer money should return to the American public, and we should decide whether we want to spend more on the UN or not spend it or send that $180 million someplace else. So I'm somewhat dismayed that the State Department has taken the position against basic honesty and saying that money should go ahead and stay in the UN because it's already spent. Somebody needs to return the $180 million. If the State Department spent part of it without authority by Congress, then they need to fork over another $100 million and we get our $80 million back from the UN because it's an issue of basic honesty. Then we will deal with the issue of security. And if we need more security around the UN, then let's have legislation to deal with that, and let Congress pass that legislation or vote on that legislation one way or the other. But it's simply not the UN's money. Give us back our money. It doesn't belong to the United Nations. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3.5 minutes to the chair of the Middle East and South Asia Subcommittee of House Foreign Affairs and ranking member, and Mr. Ackerman of New York. 3.5 minutes.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 3.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm opposed to this bill for one simple reason. It's not a smart thing to do. It recklessly jeopardizes the security and safety of the people of New York City, and it does so for no reason. This is a national security issue. It would be irresponsible and indefinitely delay the vital security improvements to the perimeter of the UN campus in the city that the State Department wants to undertake and has the resources to commit. Why do this? Only a radical, wild-eyed obsession with taking a pound of flesh out of the UN, which at times deserves it, and do so no matter what the cost to our national security. Where is the common sense in clawing back money that is going to be used for desperately needed, long overdue security upgrades that we have the money for anyway and have the responsibility to do anyway? Where's the benefit to the taxpayer for maintaining the vulnerability of the most prominent international target, which happens to be al-Qaeda's most highly targeted city? I can see how the terrorists benefit from reduced security. But I'm having a terribly hard time to see how New Yorkers or Americans or 1 million tourists to the building or even the multitudes of international representatives at the United Nations who we have undertaken to keep safe will benefit. The UN's Capital Market Plan calls for $100 million in security upgrades. As the host nation, that's something about which we should be proud. We are the guarantors of the UN's physical security. We have the money in the tax equalization fund that we can use for these security upgrades. The State Department has already committed to do it. The UN wants us to do it. New York City needs us to do it. The New York City Police Department is literally on its knees begging us to do it. We have the money. We don't need further appropriations. All we need to do is stop this bizarre and radical effort to derail the whole effort. And you want to eliminate $100 million in jobs? Why? Security in New York is something I take very seriously. I think most members do. As the bill shows, some clearly don't. They're all too happy to rush to the floor every September 11th and boast about the amazing heroism of our police, our firefighters, our first responders. One day a year they think New York City is part of America. The rhetoric is all patriotism and bombast, full of promises to do whatever it takes, and then comes the time for paying for it. And then, Madam Speaker, some members have a change of heart. Proudly remembering 9/11 heroism for some members was no impediment to telling workers deathly ill from their time on the pile to go ahead and die. Congress didn't have the money for them, at least not until the story got out. Those of us from New York haven't forgotten the so-called patriots who fought tooth and nail to stop the passage of the James DeGrota 9/11 Health Care Compensation Act. And now, instead of fighting to get Congress to do the minimally decent thing, we find ourselves on the floor of the House fighting to prevent Congress from doing the maximum stupid thing. I'm not sure this constitutes progress. Taking money from vital security upgrades is radical, irresponsible, and reckless. It's stupid. Vote no on stupid.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you. I yield myself such time as I may consume. Thank you.
Gentlelady's
Just to
recognized.
rebut some of the arguments, to my colleagues, I ask, if this was so urgent, why didn't the Obama administration request these funds legitimately last year? Why didn't the last Congress fund it? Secondly, the CBO needs to have the actual funds reimbursed so that the savings can be tabulated. And also, Madam Speaker, I hold out this letter from the Undersecretary of State for Management, which says that this construction is primarily the responsibility of the United Nations. They themselves are saying that this is not a U.S. host country responsibility. And less than 2 hours ago, we received a letter, finally, from the State Department, even though we'd asked for it repeatedly, claiming for the first time ever that the current TEF surplus is, quote, now approximately $80 million. It's either the new math or it took the scheduling of the bill on the floor of the House of Representatives to get the administration to effectively admit for the first time that it has already given away $100 million owed back to the U.S. taxpayers. This is an outrage, Madam Speaker. Even now, the State Department doesn't have the honesty to admit its decision, but tries to hide behind the UN. In that letter, they write, as the State Department notified the Congress in December 2010, the United Nations advised the Department of its intent to apply $100 million of previously existing TEF credits to fund critically important security enhancements at the UN headquarters complex, end quote. But the UN cannot and will not do any such thing without express instructions from the U.S. Don't take my word for it. This is what the State Department told Congress when we started asking these tough questions a few months ago. The UN, quote, applies credits consistent with requests from the relevant member states and will not move forward with using them in other ways, end quote. So, the administration owes Congress a long overdue explanation of, one, who instructed the UN to keep and spend $100 million that were payable to the United States? Three, on what basis did they make that decision? After 3 months of repeatedly asking for the detailed plans and the cost and the estimates, we have received only, again, a single piece of cursory figures. This is it. The UN should give U.S. taxpayers back the $179 million that we overpaid. Plain and simple. If the State Department gave most of that away to the UN in some backroom deal, then we will make sure that we can recoup these funds from the Department. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.